Young scholars, this is Mr. Hare talking to you from my house to yours. And today, or this week in social studies, our objective is the same as it was last week. We're going to identify and create or represent features of the natural environment. And last week we did that by going on a virtual field trip to Mount Rushmore. And this week we're going to go to Yellowstone National Park. Now, last week, I had never been to Mount Rushmore. I had no idea. But this week's destination, I know pretty well. I've spent some time up there. I've been up there. I'm going to let you in on a secret. This was Mr. Hare a long time ago. This is 20th century Mr. Hare. Ooh, many, many years ago. That's Mr. Hare and cousin of Mr. Hare. That's Debbie. And we were in Montana, and in the background you see the mountains there. I think that's why they named it Montana, because of all the mountains. That's in Madison Range. It was in a place called Ennis, Montana. And I was up there a little bit, and this is the house. And there's Mr. Hare's car from a long time ago. That's Jerry and Debbie's Suburban. Anyway, so that's the porch where that picture was taken. And you know what? In Montana, it's really cold, beautiful. They have bears. You know, I had not seen bears myself until I was up there. One morning, early on, I was making coffee, and I go to the kitchen sink, and there's a little window looking out over the porch, and I'm making coffee, and I look out, and there's this bear. And I said, "Hey, Jerry, there's a bear there." And he said, "Oh, yeah, that's a thing here." The bear was going through the garbage. He was on the porch. And this photo, we were on the porch. That's where the porch was. He was going through the garbage on the porch to get something to eat. I didn't go out onto the porch to talk to the bear. My cousin didn't either, so none of us did. So kind of neat. Different world, things we just don't see here in Garland, Texas. So let's take a trip to Yellowstone, see some of what we're going to see. A teacher from Spring Creek Elementary named Mr. Wynn, Stuart Wynn, made this video, and we're going to see how it looks. Some of the things that, man, he shows some great stuff in Yellowstone National Park. I made a video earlier, but then after I watched it and I watched this, I was like, hey, I like Mr. Wynn's better than mine, so I'm going to show you Mr. Wynn's. And I'll just put my face up here. That's okay. He said we could do that. He is great. But here we see these things called geysers. And there's trees. And the geysers are like when steam comes up from the earth because of the heat. Remember we were talking about, let me turn the music off. Remember we were talking about the heat, how it can change things? It can push things up too. Because all of this around here, I think that's Madison River or maybe Missouri River. All of Yellowstone is on top of like a volcano. There's an underground volcano, and all of this is on top of that, or at least part of it is on top of a volcano. Maybe I'm telling you the wrong thing, but I know there's a volcano underground somewhere under Yellowstone, or maybe the whole park. But that's what pushes these little steam geysers to come out. And right here, it's going to show that Yellowstone National Park is located in Wyoming. And on the map, that's where it is. The place where my cousins have their place is kind of right in here, about an hour away. And in Yellowstone, we see all kinds of animals. We see moose, elk, wolves, bears, buffalo, and all kinds of birds. It's amazing. You know what? Why don't we just listen to the music a little bit and see what they show us? There's a geyser.
Especially Old Faithful geyser.
They call it Old Faithful because it's pretty regular. It erupts all the time. And I'm talking about, it's like exploding steam coming out of the ground. And the reason they call it Old Faithful is because sometimes the other ones don't erupt very often. You might wait days, weeks, months, maybe years. But this one does it pretty often. Now, they say it could be every hour, every few hours. I know it's at least every day. And I wish I could find my photos right now. But we'll look at Mr. Stewart's Mr. Gwynn's photos. And there's a picture of a geyser shooting up into the air. It's very tall. Look at those people. That's an example of how tall those things can be.
Geothermal means heat from
Heat
the earth.
from the earth. You see a lot of that up there. He picked some good music. And there are the buffalo. That is a feature of the National Park buffalo. All kinds of wildlife. More buffalo. Bison is another word for buffalo. We see mountains. We see a lake. We see, oh, there's a moose. There's a bear and the bear cub. There's a moose. Maybe the other one was an elk. Here's a horse. There's an owl. There's another bear. That's a black bear. There's an eagle. Another view of the lake. And a waterfall. How cool is that? So, if you've already been to Yellowstone, maybe next time we have the live class, if you have photos, you can bring them. If you've not been, that's okay. Mr. Hare didn't go until he was already grown up. Okay, so if we're talking about what do we see, what are some of the things we see? We see mountains, we see rivers, we see trees, we see animals, and we see geysers. I think that's my favorite thing about Yellowstone are the geysers. But there's so many things that we could talk about or even write about or draw pictures of. And in case you were wondering, yes, there will be an activity coming up in just a second. It will be about what we saw and how we can represent the features of the natural environment that we saw in Yellowstone. And here's a way we could do it. We'll invite our old friend, Mr. Hands there, and he's going to show how we can do that. We can start off with a marker or a pencil, and we can have our paper, and we can just draw. Like, here's an example of drawing the rocks. And then he's going to draw kind of like a little hole. I think he's going for the geyser effect. Yeah, you know, if you kind of draw it like a cloud sticking up out of the ground, it'll kind of look like a geyser. And the steam shooting out just like that. And you can make little lines going from down, up, to make it look like it's going fast. And then, of course, you'd want to add some detail, like maybe putting in some trees. Maybe adding more detail, putting in the tree trunks. Maybe adding more detail to the rocks. He could have been animals in too. I don't see any though. I think Mr. Hands is proud of himself and he's finished. But that's okay. That's a representation of the features of the natural environment. So, in the activity that's going to come up, maybe we can do something similar. What do you think? I'm glad you were here. I hope you had fun. I hope if you have not been to Yellowstone, you can make it up there because it is great. So until then, be healthy, be safe, be here.